Good evening and welcome to the Kauffman Corner Podcast. A lot to get to today. We're going to go prospect hunting with the best in the business. Keith Law from The Athletic is going to be with us, former assistant general manager, one of the best, in my opinion, when it comes to the prospects. Gavin Cross, number 57 on his top 100 list. Nick Lofton just missing that top 10. Where is the Royal system right now? What about any changes that have been made? Is Keith on board with the direction of the team? Bigger problem for this team when it comes to its talent. Is it the drafting? Or is it the development? Maybe some of the guys that have fallen off some of the list. Asa Lacy, Frank Mazzucato. What are we looking at in the 23 draft? It's all coming up next here on the Kauffman Corner.
This is the Kauffman Corner Podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kauffman Corner is hosted by Rany, Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kauffman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
And good evening and welcome. If you're catching us via the podcast, we do stream live Sunday nights at 10 p.m. We'll get out of the way of the Super Bowl next week. It'll be Monday night next week, but coming to you at 10 p.m. Central Time. If you want to catch us on the stream, be a part of the conversation, participate in the comment section, and a very special edition of the Kauffman Corner. I know for Rany and I, because we're both giant fans of the work that is done by our guest today. Keith Law joins us here on the Kauffman Corner, the best in the business when it comes to breaking down the prospects. Just a great baseball mind and always a fun conversation. Keith, welcome to the Kauffman Corner. We really appreciate your time here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good, Rany.
Oh, Keith, I'm just going to say I'm delighted to have you on. We've been, friends and colleagues for 25 years since our days at Baseball Prospectus, and really excited to talk Royals prospects with you. I want to lead in by saying that we invited you on the show earlier this week, and you graciously accepted. And then the following day, your list of organizational rankings came out at The Athletic. And like I normally do with these lists, I start at the bottom and work my way up, hoping that I will not see the Royals at the bottom of the list as I keep moving up. And I fully expected to see the Royals down at the bottom, and kept scrolling up to the point where I actually thought I had missed them until I found them squarely in the middle of the pack, number 16 overall in the organizational rankings. And I want to say, I know you don't want to comment on the work of other people, but just to give people our listeners a perspective, I know Kylie McDaniel at ESPN just ranked the Royals number 28 in all of baseball. Baseball America has not put out their list yet, but their most recent one from late last year had the Royals dead last in all of baseball in their farm system. So I was delighted to see where the Royals ranked, but I'm going to ask you a question that I know I've never asked you, and maybe no one in the history of the world has ever asked you. Keith, why do you love the Royals so much?
I wasn't aware that I did. This system is I guess it's underappreciated because it's very easy to point to names in the system who've maybe not performed up to expectations and put Asa Lacy in his own category, right? That's this whole separate issue. But I think a lot of people looked at that 2021 draft class where they took Frank Mazzucato 7th overall. I think he was something like 43rd on my draft board, but went way under slot with him and used the savings to get several other players over slot who now a year later actually look pretty good. Actually, that draft class as a whole, I think looks good. But none of those guys is very close to helping in the majors. And it's easy to say, well, Mazzucato wasn't very good last year. And Shane Panzini was really not good last year. He was one of those overslot guys. And Ben Cadorna looks like he's not close. I think he's emerged as the best guy right now from the class. And I think it's a little too easy to look at guys in that system and say, well, he's flawed and he's not performing and he's not there yet. And to me, that is kind of unfair. It's only looking at one side of the coin as opposed to looking at some of these guys are probably right where they should be. Many of these guys are developing on kind of a typical pace as opposed to, I'm sorry, Ben Cadorna isn't Andrew Painter, right? I'm sorry he didn't come out and just blow through the minor leagues in his first pro year and end up in AA, but Andrew Painter's a unicorn, or at least highly exceptional. Whereas Cadorna seems to me much more on a typical path. And they have a lot of guys in the system who are just progressing very nicely. They're not blowing through the minors, but that's okay, right? It's fine. It's really about where they end up, not where they are at any particular point in time on their path. And as I work through all the systems and all the top 20s and all the org reports, which I'm still finishing up a few, but as I worked through that, I said, this system's actually pretty deep. And maybe it doesn't have the, wit type superstars right now, but there are a lot of guys in the system who project to have real major league value, including a lot of guys who I think could at least become regulars or fourth starters. And if you're the Royals, that's really valuable. I think it's really valuable to most teams, right? I'd say it's especially so to a team like the Royals. It's unlikely to ever run particularly high payrolls.
Keith, did the pandemic, set the Royals back more than other teams? We know that was you talked about where guys are and not having another Bobby Witt or another top end guy, but were they seem to get some of their hitters at the top end going in the right direction, right? MJ
Yes.
Melendez, they had a number of guys that were really lost. They all seemed to circle the wagons and get going. So that time seemed to be valuable for them. But the pitching side, the rest of the organization, do you have a way of gauging which teams managed that year of no minor leagues better? And did it affect the Royals more than others?
I don't think it affected them more than others. I think they made really good use of the time on the position player side, right? We saw Melendez and Prado and others in the system turn around. And God, I saw both of those guys in Wilmington extensively in 2019 and thought, I wasn't sure Prado was going to see the majors at that point. He was, approach was poor. There wasn't even that much power. And if there was power in there, who knew, right? He could never even get to it. Melendez, at least you could hang your hat on. This is a catcher with a cannon of an arm, and he would occasionally get to power. Those guys were swinging and missing so much at that point that it was irresponsible to talk about major league future. It was like, hey, we got to get these guys good enough to hit in AA. Give the Royals and Alex Umwalt in particular a ton of credit. They used the time off as valuable a fashion as any club in baseball, I would say. And that, we talk a little bit about some of those guys, the more famous guys, but it was up and down the system. They had, I forget the exact number, but it was around a 35% increase in walks drawn by their 4 full season rosters comparing 2019 to 2021. And that is, if it's not unprecedented, it's pretty rare to see that kind of a system-wide improvement. This wasn't one or two guys. This was just about everyone. And it's made it pretty clear, I think, that they can continue to do this. If they draft a player or sign an international free agent who has most of what you're looking for in a hitter, but needs to work on a plan at the plate. And the Royals folks, if you talk to them, they're very big on talking about this in terms of a plan for at-bats. It's not just about plate discipline. It's not just about patience. It is a plan for an at-bat. And frankly, that's what I'd like to hear more than anything else. It's nice that a guy can draw a bunch of walks, but I mean, anyone could, well, many players can do that just by being passive. That's not the goal. And the Royals recognize that that's not the goal. And I think they've established themselves as one of the best, if not the best team in baseball at helping hitters develop plans at the plate, improving what they already have, or often going from not much of a plan to having a real plan. And I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for them too, and acquiring other players. I hope they'll do that now that they've recognized that they can do this with hitters, go out in trades, identify hitters who have characteristics you really like, but could use help on a plan and an approach, and say, we can help that player better than his current organization can. And that represents an opportunity for us.
Keith, yeah, Soren and I are definitely charter members of the Alex Zumwalt fan club here, and we've really, since we saw what the changes that Prado and Melendez in particular made after the pandemic, I almost didn't want to believe for a while that the Royals actually might be ahead of the curve on hitter development in some way. But this past year, one of the reasons why I was surprised that you had the Royals so high was simply because they graduated so many hitters to the major leagues, guys who lost their rookie eligibility. Obviously, Melendez and Prado, but also Bobby Witt, Vinny Pasquantino, Michael Massey. And then a guy, when you talk about identifying players in other organizations, it's been a long time since I've thought of the Royals as the kind of organization that could take another organization's trash and turn it into treasure. But the Royals may have done that when they traded for Drew Waters last summer. And I'm very curious what you've heard or your impression of the Drew Waters that they acquired, the Drew Waters that we saw in the major leagues in September. Do you feel like he is a potential success story? Is he an example of what the Royals can do? Was that just maybe hitting into some good luck, or have the Royals actually restored his value as a potential everyday guy in the majors?
I don't think he was any different after they got him in AAA or in the majors, but I think he is exactly the type of player that we're talking about that the Royals should be targeting. This is a guy who's very toolsy, who can play center field, can really throw, is a plus runner. There's some power there. I don't think it's huge power, but I think it's solid average power. It's enough to make him an everyday player. And when he was in the low minors, despite having basically no plan at the plate, he could get by because he had such physical gifts, and he hit really well in the low minors. And when he got to, but you could see if you went and actually watched the player, scouted the player, you could see this is not a plan. This is probably not going to hold up. At some point in the upper minors, pitchers are going to be able to exploit this guy. And they did. AA, AAA, you really saw it. That's exactly who the Royals should be going after. He's young, he's athletic, he's toolsy. Get him out of an organization that, obviously, Atlanta's done a really good job with a lot of their players, but Waters never got better. When I see a player like that where there's just no adjustment, no progress year over year, that's saying to me, either they're not working on it with him, or he's not taking to it the way that they're working with him, which I think is much more the case with Waters, is that obviously Atlanta had success doing the same thing with Austin Riley. They didn't with Waters. So if you're the Royals, you say, well, we do it differently. And we've done this with a lot of different players. Let's take a shot. I don't know if Drew Waters is going to work out. He is. I'm looking at my Royals list now. I only have him 10th in the system because I'm still skeptical. But you go get 5 Drew Waters. One of them is going to work out and pay for all the others, essentially. You're going to get so much value out of that. Because if Drew Waters has just a decent plan at the plate, just some idea of what he's doing when he goes up there, he's probably an everyday player for a lot of clubs. And that's an incredibly valuable player to have under control to get for not that much, right? They gave up, he was part of the draft pick trade.
Keith, we got a little bit of a bad connection. You were great, rock solid, and then all of a sudden now it's gotten kind of digital. We caught what you were saying. Maybe let's have you pop out and maybe click the link and pop back in and see if we can get that cleared up, because we got kind of like a digital. We're getting a digital version of Keith Law right now. So if you want to just X out and then come back in, and we'll get Keith Law back in here into the Kauffman Corner. Good time for us to tell you. Kauffman Corner is brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. And then, got a little choppy there with Keith. We'll get him back on here in a second. Hopefully have a better connection. But the one thing that he was getting at that I thought was kind of interesting, right? 10 Drew Waters. I mean, I remember talking with Keith when that deal came down. He's like, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan, but I get what it's doing. And to his point, to say, hey, go get 10 of them. You land 1 or 2 of them. Keith, thanks for joining us back in here. We appreciate that.
Yeah, hopefully it's better.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay,
That's
great.
Tell me, when you look at whatever deficiencies the Royals have had, can you put your finger on whether it's drafting or is it development? Because we saw the change, Dayton Moore let go, but JJ Picola coming in. We've had lots of folks in the chat room that sit there like, hey, it's just Dayton 2.0. It's no different.
Nope.
I've had conversations with JJ Picola. He's certainly it feels that he's different, has a different, plan. They're bringing people in. I always tell people, like, give it a year, right? You can't just wave a wand. I get the fears, and the leash probably shouldn't be as long for JJ Piccolo as it would be if somebody was coming in from outside and just said, everybody's out and we're starting new. But when you look at it, so it'll take time for him to get all the people in place that he wants. And we've seen a rush of things happening here lately, at least on the big league club. But can you put your finger on development? Are they taking the right guys and not developing them? Are they taking the wrong guys and have no hope of bringing them up? Or can you tell?
I think it's been a little of everything. I mean, I think we can all identify that the biggest problem that they've had has been pitching development, right? And I will just forever go back to that 2018, was the 18 draft class. They took all those college pitchers, and so far, all that's produced is Brady Singer having one decent 3/4 of a season and not really addressing one of the biggest problems that he had to. So am very, very curious to see if he's able to repeat that again over a full season. The fact that Lynch and Coar and even Bubich, who I know is never a big high ceiling guy, but how is that guy not a fifth starter in the big leagues at this point? That to me pointed to it's more systemic, right? If you don't develop one of those players, you talk about, well, maybe this was just the player, or that's just kind of how pitching goes. Obviously, we've all been watching the minors for long enough to say, yeah, they don't all work out. I'm sure the Royals at the time were like, these guys aren't all going to work out. But if 3 of them work out, we've done exceptionally well for a draft class. But the fact that if you want to give them Singer right now, fine. One of those guys has worked out and that's it. That points to more of a developmental issue. And I think one of the bigger problems too is that this organization, they'd almost maybe been in place a little too long. And so you had not seen a lot of big adjustments or changes until the Zumwalt change, until he came in and brought his new approach. I'm not sure the Royals were doing much different at all from, say, 8 to 10 years previously. And that is going to change. I think it's already changing under Piccolo. And sometimes, I don't like to cheer people losing their jobs at all, but I think we now can say that now that Dayton is out and JJ's replaced him, this was probably good for the organization to shake things up, to move some people around and bring in some more voices from outside, because obviously they're doing some pretty good things on the hitting side. They need to be more effective on the pitching side. They cannot be taking pitchers from wherever, high school or college, and high in the draft, and then having them not work out. At that point, you might as well just be the Orioles and just draft hitters. And I don't think anyone's advocating that. I don't even love the way the Orioles draft, although I concede they've been very productive with that philosophy. But the Royals also seem to want to take pitchers. Well, that's fine, but then you have to develop them. And they've still, with that Mazzucato draft class too, I mean, he, I think in particular, is going to be a really interesting guy to watch because it was always going to be a longer development track for him. But they've still got guys in the system to help. And I still think there's hope for Lynch and Coer, especially. All those guys, Bolin, once if his stuff is 100% back this year and the first full year back from Tommy John, he's got promise. They still have a lot of guys to work with. So it's really not too late for any of them, but it also poses an early and very visible test for Piccolo and his group to at least maybe show some quick results and say, whether it's Mazzucato going out and having just a better year this year and showing some improvement in the stuff, or one of those major leaguers I mentioned comes out and becomes a viable major league starter this year through development, through work that the Royals coaches at whatever level are doing with them. And that to me is the thing I keep coming back to, is that it was almost like the left hand and the right hand weren't really communicating, right? You're going to take all these pitchers in the draft, but you're not developing them and you're not showing the competence, the core competence, to develop pitchers. So, was there something wrong with the Mazzucato draft class on its face? I don't think so, but don't take Mazzucato, Caderna, Panzini, etc. if you do not have the people and the infrastructure set up to develop pitchers like that. Otherwise, you run the risk of it being Ash Russell and Nolan Watson all over again.
Soren and I have gotten to the point where I don't think there's a pitcher in the organization that he and I are willing to just write off completely, no matter how bad they've been,
Mhm.
because it's like, well, let's see what John Heasley or Carlos Hernandez or any of these guys, let's see what they can do with an actual competent major league pitching coach. And we don't have to beat that dead horse, but I do you share our optimism that Brian Sweeney and Zach Bovee from the Twins, who's the assistant pitching coach, some of the other pitching coaches that they've brought into the system this winter are kind of much more progressive and are leading the Royals in the right direction when it comes to pitcher development?
Always take a wait and see approach, but I'm glad they're bringing in people from the outside. That's the biggest thing, is that I just think they needed new voices. I'm not denigrating anybody who was currently or previously in the organization, but I think it's fair for us, even as outsiders, to look and say that the results just aren't there. And over that period of time, with that many pitchers, too, that many guys who've just not panned out, Scott Blewett and Foster Griffin before the Russell and Watson picks, and then that whole college draft class that I was talking about. That's a lot of arms, a lot of guys who were high draft picks, who were also seen by the industry as worthy of high draft picks, too. It's not like they were just going completely out of left field. And getting basically nothing out of all those guys, or I guess if you want to say Singer, that's 1 out of maybe 10 to 12 guys drafted very high who've not turned into major league starters, or only one who has turned into a major league starter so far. That's unacceptable. And in any environment, in any industry, you would look at that kind of success rate and compare it to your peers and say, we are not doing what we need to be doing. If you're the Royals, you can't be below the median in developing starting pitching. You've probably got to be above the median because of your payroll situation, but you've got to be at least in the middle of the pack. And they weren't. And that's a point where you say, let's go outside and find other organizations, or find other voices, find organizations that are really good at this and poach their people, or just find individual people you happen to know, bring a different philosophy, and will help change things. And it's going to be hard, right? That's 16 years under Dayton. That's a big ship to turn around, and it may take more than a year. I just hope they have 1 or 2 success stories out of the gate to show people that they're moving things in the right direction. It will buy them more time and more trust for guys like, I keep coming back to Mazzucato because it's going to take time. He's got to throw harder, and that's going to take physical development on top of other things they need to do with him. But it will buy them more time with everyone, us included, if they hit on a couple of guys, like one of those college draftees I mentioned becomes a viable major league starter this year.
Keith, how much could, we've seen the Royals have prospects that come up. They're in rankings, right? All through the minor leagues, and they get to the big leagues. And as Rany said, nothing happens. Cal Eldred, an obvious place to look. And obviously the Royals have looked there and made that change. Also, though, what about behind the dish? Because, everybody loves Salvador Perez. You certainly love the power. Don't necessarily love the on base, but you love the power. Love the guy. Love the leadership. Love the way he connects the Latin and American sides of the clubhouse. He does a lot of things. There are intangibles to what having Salvador Perez get on your flights from city to city to city bring beyond just his baseball skills. But he's known as a really bad pitch framer. I've had some people in the organization. They're like, yeah, they acknowledge it. There's some optimism that they've got some new plans on that they think they've maybe figured out some things, some new voices, as you said, Keith, have a different view and are going to take a different approach. MJ Melendez as well. He wasn't framing well according to the analytics. How much of that could be what's crushing? Young guys come up, they're in awe of the third deck of the major league stadiums and kind of like their heads spinning a little bit, and they're not getting those borderline calls time and time again, and they get behind. How much of the problem could be fixed if they suddenly make Salvador Perez a better pitch framer?
Or if they make Melendez a better pitch framer and let him catch more, right? I understand Sal's a huge fan favorite. And I mean, that 21 season he had was kind of like a double-edged sword, right? He had an unbelievable season, but it also probably bought him a lot more time as the regular there. And it may be time to move on from him. And I understand Royals fans aren't going to like to hear that. And that's okay. I hate the Royals. So I hate all clubs. But to me, I mean,
by the way, hashtag sarcasm.
Sarcasm. Yes. Hopefully that came through. Yes. But also I look at this system. It's like, there's more catching coming, right? They've done a really nice job. Like when my Royals top 20 comes out later this week, you'll see Carter Jensen's on it and Luca Tresh is on it. There's actual catching depth. There's probably very few clubs that could rival their catching depth too, which to me, it's all the more reason to say we got to give Melendez a lot more opportunity behind the plate. Stop talking about what other positions can he play. He can catch, he can really throw, and he's really athletic for a catcher too. Not in a running speed sense, but in terms of agility behind the plate, I think he'll bring a different energy back there. And you know what? He's pretty young. You can probably work with him on pitch framing a little more easily as a result. And so I'd really like to see what difference that potentially makes. I'm not saying you release Perez, but maybe he's more part-time and he DHs a little bit. And you let him try to work with Melendez as kind of another catching coach to help him. But I don't know how much of an effect it has. You asked me, do I think this is a reason, part of the reason? My answer is I don't know. It's a great hypothesis. And also, there are other reasons to support making some kind of change in the workload of the various catchers on the roster, and maybe do that and see if it helps any of the pitchers. It's not going to help all of them at once, but it might help one or two of them, and you take that gain if you can get it.
So Keith, the one guy who was on your the one Royal who's on your top 100 prospect list was Gavin Cross, who was the Royals' first round pick last year, the 10th pick overall, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And wedged in your little blurb about him was this sentence. Let me see here. Here we go. He looked more like a polished hitter who might have some power in the spring, but over the summer he showed better bat speed and more impact when he squared it up, so his power ceiling might be closer to 30 homers than the 20-ish expected of him when he was an amateur. Now, if I didn't know better, I'd say that you actually injected some optimism into that and some credit to the Royals potentially for unlocking a little bit more power in his swing after they drafted him. And certainly after what we saw with Prado and Melendez, basically leading the minor leagues in home runs coming off the pandemic after the horrible year in Wilmington. Is this a sense where you feel like the Royals may have worked on his swing, improved it, and do you feel like this has meaningfully raised his ceiling as a prospect?
I don't think they did anything with him. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but having talked to people in the Royals organization, as I do for every organization for the prospect rankings, I think they were a little surprised. They got him in, and because the draft is so late, you have so little time to work with guys. If you want them to go out and play before the minor league season ends, it's like, hey, here's your hat. What's your hurry? And you send them right out to the complex league or maybe to low A at this point. And I don't think they changed anything, but the sense I got, first of all, from them was that, hey, this guy's swinging the wood bat maybe better than he swung the 10 bats they use in college baseball here, which is unusual. You usually expect guys to have a little more trouble swinging wood, and they might lose a touch of bat speed, especially at first. Right? It's not like they've never swung a wood bat, but it's the most recent experience they had of his 55 games playing with the composite bats in college baseball. So you expect some adjustment. And then it was from other pro scouts I talked to also, like, man, this guy can really hit, and it's good contact. It's loud contact. Why wasn't he considered a higher pick in the draft? And especially for a guy who I don't think he's a center fielder in the long run, but he's fine out there right now. I think he's one of those guys who'll play center a little bit further up in the minors. Eventually move into a corner because you're going to want a real legitimate defender in center, and he's not at that level. And so I find pro scouts take in a drafted player's first season, especially a college player, always very interesting because they don't have any history usually with these guys. And so there's a lot of, like, Dalton Rushing was the Dodgers' second round pick this year, yet he's on my top 100 because every pro scout I talked to who saw him were like, how the hell was this guy not a first rounder? And it's like, well, it's Dodgers devil magic, obviously. But to me, that is always interesting, right? They're not biased by previous looks. They're just seeing this guy with the wood bat, first time probably ever against, it's usually low A, but pro pitching. And if they're coming back raving about a guy's hit tool, especially, it's, oh, okay, maybe this guy's a little better than we thought. And I loved Cross in the spring. I thought it was a great pick. And for him to come out and play that well and show that well to Royals people, to pro scouts, made me say, oh, maybe I was a little light on the ceiling. I think we all were. I don't know of anybody, including the Royals' own people, who would have told you last spring, we think it's a 30-homer bat. It was more of this is a really good college hitter who might get to some power as he fills out a little bit more, gets to the age 23, 24, and he's really safe. This is a guy who plays in the big leagues, and it's a good probability of an everyday player, and we'll take that, especially in this draft class. And I was completely on board with that. I thought that was great. And if you do that, and then you happen to stumble into some ceiling, even better.
Yeah, no doubt. Gavin's there at Gavin Cross is there at number 57. You also have 10 that just missed, right? Nick Lofton is a guy that's been mentioned there. Is that, the Royals have kind of a love-hate, it seems, with middle infield, right? Like they get lots of them, but they don't seem to get them, to be full-time big leaguers. There's a lot of talk about Nicky Lopez possibly being traded. Lofton's the one guy that they've, had out in the outfield. What is he, and how bullish are you on him? Is he, listen, I've always said, if somebody comes up and they're just a utility guy and they get 350 at bats and they put up decent numbers, they play on Sundays and all that, everyone gets all upset because they didn't end up being a superstar. Having that guy for the league minimum is valuable. It allows you to pay the superstar someplace else. So there is value in just being a part of a 26-man roster and contributing. Is that what he is depth, or is there maybe a little more? I know one of your write-ups, you said some sneaky power there. Do you see maybe a little bit more?
Yeah, I see more, and I'm projecting a little bit. I think there's a little more power to come. He really hasn't come into what they colloquially call his man strength. He still looks a bit like a kid, like he's maybe 20 or so, and he's not, obviously. I think it's coming. I still think it's in there, and I see a guy who could probably play shortstop. He's probably never going to play shortstop for the Royals, but everyone says he's pretty good in center. And he's definitely good at second base. And they've moved him all around to, it's almost like a Tampa Bay Rays type thing where we need a guy like that who can play 4 or 5 different positions. And maybe he just never settles on a single position, but he's good and athletic enough and instinctual enough to play a bunch of these spots, probably to play every day in center field or at second base, but also to back up at several other positions. And if all he is a hitter is kind of what we saw last year, that makes him, like you said, a super sub, a utility player, 350, 400 plate appearances a year, and valuable. But I think there's a little more in there. And I'm a little surprised that folks I've talked to around the industry aren't higher on him. Like, everyone likes him. Nice player. Good little player. Yeah, there's a little more than that, I think. He makes a ton of contact. He runs well. And he's hit for a little power despite not grading out that well in terms of just raw power. If this guy added 5 to 10 pounds of muscle, he's a pretty solid regular at several positions. And he's already got a great approach. It's the one guy, I don't know if he's the only guy, one of the guys in the system where Alex Umwalt might be like, yeah, you're fine, right? I got other guys to work with. You keep doing what you're doing. You've got a really good eye at the plate. And you put the ball in play a ton. Just hit it harder. And if he does that, I think you're going to have a really good big leaguer there, whether it's at one position or playing 5 different ones every year.
Yeah, I wonder with him if the disagreement is so much what the player is versus what that player is worth. And I like to use player comps for myself just as a way to kind of keep a player's talents in my head. And I know I can drive people crazy when I comp a guy to another player who doesn't look anything like him. But from the moment that Lofton was drafted, and I was looking at the way he was described. He was a supplemental first round pick, and he was kind of described as this player who could play kind of everywhere and not be a star. But it's like, why would you take that guy in the first round? But the player I kind of settled on, it sounded like the Royals were hoping he'd be another Whit Merrifield.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring that up because it's like, here we are 2 years into his career, and I really feel like that is a really good comp for the kind of player he can be in terms of value. Like, nobody looks at Whit Merrifield and says, oh, this guy's a superstar. And yet you add it all up and he's had like 3 and 4 win seasons in the major leagues. Is that the kind of player that you see Nick Lofton being, just, a league average hitter with above average speed and, defensive versatility? And actually that is a valuable player in the major leagues, maybe more than the sort of conventional wisdom would have him be.
I like that quite a bit. And Merrifield is a guy who came into a little more power a little later. It surprised all of us. I mean, God, I don't think I ever wrote Merrifield up on a top 20 for the Royals too, because it was like, there's just no juice.
Nobody did.
Right? Right. And I mean, you look at what he's produced in the big leagues, and it's one of those things that makes you just want to throw the computer out the window. It's like, I give up, right? That's just really that guy. Okay, sure. But Lofton is cut from similar cloth, at least, in that really good baseball player. And this is one thing the Royals have always been big on. They love the high character guys they'll talk about, or at least under Dayton, they did talk about it a lot. And the guys who really good feel for the game, really good understanding, good instincts. Hey, those guys are great when they have some tools too. And Lofton does. And Merrifield had a little bit, but I think Lofton is actually probably a better pure athlete and certainly a better runner. And if he comes into a little more strength, because the biggest thing he had, I know his line in his brief time in AAA wasn't that impressive, but a lot of it was just the contact wasn't good enough. He's just got to hit the ball harder. And I think if he'd done that last year, he would have shown up on some top 100 lists, including mine. So could he be on the Merrifield path, but maybe a little bit sooner? Or maybe they take lessons from having Merrifield and say, okay, here are the things we need to work on with Lofton. It's not approach. It's much more about swing and strength and unlocking a little bit more of the latent power that I think is probably still in there. And then you end up with, like Merrifield, a guy who's just a really good, if slightly underappreciated big leaguer for 4 to 5 years. Maybe Lofton gets to do that even for a little longer period because he gets to that point a little bit sooner. I'm very curious to see what he looks like when he shows up this spring and what kind of power we get out of him in the early going.
Right. Because I was going to say it seems like the one thing that Merrifield changed that the year that he went from like just organizational filler to this guy's an everyday player in the majors was he went on a workout regimen in one off season and came back with like 10 to 15 pounds of muscle. Like you said, I wonder if the Royals, having seen what that did for Merrifield, if they have pushed Lofton to just get in better shape, add muscle mass, and wind him up and let him go this spring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's it's easier said than done, right? Not everyone can add muscle mass. I certainly can't. Right? Fortunately, you don't need much to be a sports writer, but you try that. Again, it's a little bit like what I was saying about the pitching, right? You take a couple of Nick Loftons and you work with all of them to it's not about hitting the ball over the fence with him. Obviously, if he does, great, but it's just harder quality contact. You make so much contact. You have such a good idea at the plate. You're making contact. Let's just make it better quality contact. More of those fall in for base hits. With your speed, you'll end up with some extra doubles and triples along the way, and you're just a much more valuable player. You do that with a couple of those guys, and they won't all work out, but one or two of them does, and it justifies all the time you've invested in the group of players as a whole.
With Lofton and the Royals' entire system, you meant the Royals under Dayton Moore, and so the farm system stocked all with Dayton Moore players as of right now, other than the handful of moves that have been made up at the top by J.G. Piccolo, but they're toolsy. Right. They love upside, as you said. Speed is one of the big ones. They have a lot of speed with the new rules. How many times you can throw over the bigger base pass. Rany and I have talked about it. And when we went round and round about Adalberto Mondesi, was like, okay, well, what how much more valuable is he going to be if he can stay healthy, obviously, but with the speed, does the Royal system get a kiss with these new rules? Does that approach change how we look at guys, or is that just a couple of hacks that have rooted for the Royals that are trying to find something in the rules that are going to make a bigger difference than is really what we should be worrying about?
My attitude on all the rule change stuff has been, we'll see. I just don't know, right? We're guessing. Will banning the shift help a lot of these left-handed pull hitters? Maybe. Teams are pretty creative too. Maybe they'll find a way to work around it, and they'll just still position second baseman in a way that it mutes some of the expected gains from banning the shift. So I don't know. I personally hope we see more stolen bases because stolen bases are awesome. I understand, my analytical side knows exactly the problem with stolen bases. It's really the problem with getting caught stealing, obviously. Right. And, if that changes the calculus a little bit and we see more guys running, awesome. Big fan. I will wait and see if this actually has the desired effect. I feel like the history of Major League Baseball when it comes to any sort of rules change is the unintended consequences. They just seem to never see it coming. And sometimes they should, sometimes they shouldn't. But baseball's got a pretty good history going back to the Bud Selig years of putting something in place, saying it'll do X, and then being absolutely shocked when it does Y instead.
So one of my big frustrations with the Royals the last couple of years has been their in the area of Latin American player development. And I think some of that is because when Dayton Moore was first hired, that was, I think, the single most profound change that we saw on the player development side. Before Dayton Moore, the Royals had by far the worst track record of signing and developing players from Latin America of any major league franchise throughout their history. And, in retrospect, in the first year of, Dayton Moore being in charge, the Royals signed Salvador Perez, Kelvin Herrera, and Giordano Ventura, which is just like, if you could come up with that much talent in Latin America every 5 years, you're going to be one of the all-time teams in that regard. But that well really seems to have run a bit dry here over the last 5-10 years. Do you have? I know you don't cover the Latin American beat when they're signing 16-year-olds very closely, but do you have any sense of where the Royals are in that regard? Are they, they've had some well-publicized failures. Eric Pena was a $3.7 million, and it looks like a bust at this point. But they also have Michael Garcia in the system right now, Alcides Escobar's cousin, who I actually kind of think sneakily is one of the best prospects in the system. I'm just curious if you have any insight into what you think on the Latin American development side.
Yeah, I actually have Garcia 5th in the system, so I think we're on the same page. He's really good. It's funny for a guy who I don't think was on anyone's radar a year ago. He just very quietly made his way up through the system and to the big leagues. It was like, wait, this guy's better than everybody thought. And you particularly look at the performance, the batted ball data. This actually looks like it's pretty sustainable. They've missed at the high end of the market. That's the thing that really concerns me. And Pena, obviously the biggest example of a guy they were very convinced they'd found a guy who'd at least hit, even with other questions about him. It's like, we really think he can hit. He's going to come into a lot of power. And they thought the kid was, he may be a great kid, but they thought he was more polished at the plate by far than he turned out to be. But they haven't also played very much in the higher end of the international free agent market, right? Who they signed for more than $1 million. I think in the last 5 years, it's Daniel Vasquez is the only one. I could be forgetting somebody, obviously, but they're not.
I wonder, do you feel like they got gun shy after they signed like Ciuli Matias and Jason Guzman? Because they did it, what you said 5, 6, 7 years ago, and Alberto Mondesi is sort of the one sort of success, but they did have some big ticket items, and none of those guys panned out. I wonder if they got gun shy and started.
It's possible, right? And there are teams that that have the belief that the best way to participate in international free agency is to not go after those guys. It's to sign more players for lower bonuses. It's not about spending less in total. It's spreading the money around a larger number of players
or lottery tickets.
Yes. Which is not unreasonable. I think I was just writing up Jose Ramos is a prospect in the Dodgers system, a Panamanian outfielder who's flawed but has huge upside, and they signed him for $30,000, which just seems criminal, honestly. But that's a philosophy. There are so many success stories of guys who signed for certainly less than $250,000 who've turned out to be really good big leaguers that a lot of teams say, maybe it's not worth putting all our eggs in the Eric Pena baskets. It's better to spread it around. I actually don't know if that's what the Royals are doing. I can infer a little bit from what they've done the last few years, which is, again, not spending. And, Vasquez, he's still only 19, but he's done basically nothing in pro ball since he signed for 7 figures. That maybe they've said, this is just not our specialty. We shouldn't be in the upper end of the market, and we should stay out of that and focus more on signing low dollar guys who we really like also and feel like maybe we can get them in and develop them further. But I look at my top 20 for the Royals, and it is very heavily skewed towards guys acquired either through the draft or a few guys acquired through trades.
Yeah. And you mentioned the lottery ticket. I think the Astros, we were looking at it in the World Series. I think 2 of their starters, their setup guy and their closer, and I'd have to go back and look, when it was more in season, top of mind, the names on guys, but they were all those kind of guys, 20, 30,000. Like it was like $150,000 for the guys that were a huge part of the Astros winning the World Series is where they all spent. What about the flip side? I want to get your thoughts on Asa Lacy. I talked to you about it on the radio show. That, we got a kick to the teeth last year when Dayton Moore said Asa Lacy is going to be a part of a championship staff. We just don't know if he's going to be a starter or a reliever. We'd love to rewind back to that kind of optimism, because it when I talked to you, it was bad and it didn't get any better the rest of the way. What would you do? What hopes do you have? There's a pedigree there. Obviously, everybody thought he was really good. This isn't a Mazzucato. They took a guy from way down the board. Maybe he didn't need to go 4, but he was a big boy. Like, any hope left?
I think I had him 3rd in the draft. I knew, I won't say who, I want to guard who said it, but somebody's opinion I really respect.
Hey, Keith, real quick, just because we're getting the digital thing again. But just because I really want to hear what you have to say, because it worked like a charm last time. Can you pop off and pop back in one more time, and then we'll wrap up with you if you could, because I really want to get Keith's response on this, because Asa Lacy, as you and I have talked about, Rany, is a guy that absolutely, if he hits, if he's that ace, all this seems to fit.
And
together.
look, even if he's an ace reliever, I mean, like I said, if you told me right now he'll turn into Josh Hader or a Josh Hader like, I would be thrilled. The Royals, I think, would be thrilled if he's at that level, even if he never starts a game in the major leagues for them. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, we've got Keith back. Keith, let's give it another try out, because I just really want to hear what you have to say on Asa Lacy.
Yeah, sorry, maybe it's because I jumped in while you're still going. So I liked the pick at the time. I think I had him third on my board. He was the best college pitcher in the draft. He was the best pitching prospect in the draft class. And somebody whose opinion I really respect thought he should have been in the 1-1 conversation, certainly a lot more than he was. Spencer Torkelson was just the presumptive 1-1 pick all spring. I never really loved that myself. And in hindsight, it turns out, well, actually the 3 best guys in the draft class, in my opinion at the time, have all been pretty bad. So we're just going to pretend that year never happened, which I think is good on a number of levels. But so 2 things on Lacy. The stuff is actually fine. When he pitched last year, you'd see the velocity, you'd see the slider, you'd see the feel for a changeup. It is not a matter of he's lost his fastball, or he had a shoulder injury in 21. It's not like that cost him his stuff. He has completely lost his delivery at this point. And I don't think it was the yips, but if you look at the stat line, you want to say, hey, got the yips. I'm not going to totally argue with you. It was pretty bad, right? He just had no idea. And if you watch him pitch, I talked to guys who did, and I've seen plenty of video, it's not good. He just looks like he is, I mean, feeling for the strike zone is probably underselling it. He's just it's a rebuild. And to me, that guy, some guys have come back from that. It is a huge developmental challenge, and different than the kind of stuff we're talking about when we talk about getting guys like Cowher and Lynch to be good big league starters, right? This is, you almost need to take Lacy aside and say, you are not getting back on a mound in a game until we're satisfied with where your delivery is, and until you're satisfied with where your delivery is. And that may take a lot of time, and it may require, like, to me, you set aside the, is he a starter? Is he a reliever? Until you see him back on a mound, and you use him in games, if you get him to that point, however you think is best suited to continuing to develop him, to get him used to a new delivery. That may be pitching 2 innings every 4 days or something like that, right? If you just put that aside, I see the size and the stuff that he could still be a starter. I don't know how you have a conversation about role. I'm not blaming you for the question, but how can we talk about that when he's walking like 2 men an inning? And, when you watch his misses, they're not close. Like, it is to the backstop. It's knocking the hitter down. He is just nowhere close at this point. And that, to me, is a guy who's just kind of lost. It's not just lost the release point. The whole delivery is not where it was. I saw him right before the world ended in 2020. And I was like, yep, I'm in. I'll take 5 of those. We're good. And when the Royals took him, I was like, you know what? They don't need a college pitcher, but why not? That guy's just staring you in the face. Just take him. So I completely got it. I don't blame them one bit. I don't blame them for what's happened. I feel bad for everyone involved. I don't want to give up hope entirely because the stuff is still there. There's still something to work with.
Keith, thank you so much for coming on. I honestly, if you were up for it, I'd go another hour or 2 myself. We've got a lot to talk to, but I value your time. I just wanted to finish off. If you could, let's end with some optimism. Are there 1 or 2 players you could mention, maybe, who are not like even top 15 or prospects in the system, guys that most Royals fans have never heard of, but that maybe you think could be pop-up guys this coming year? Some low-level guy that you're going to throw a dart at and say, this is a guy who's going to be a top prospect one day.
So, I mean, I mentioned the catching depth earlier. Carter Jensen, who they drafted as a
guy,
first high school guy who's from there, right? He's from Kansas City area. Mm-hmm. And he gets into pro ball, and everyone's coming back to me saying, this guy can really catch. I'm like, are we talking about the same guy? Just like Cooper Jensen or somebody else is his twin brother? Like, no. He's actually a glove first guy. He's got a pretty good idea at the plate, and he can get a little passive because there's power there. And I think it's a matter of just converting more of that you're getting into good counts. All right, let's convert more of that into attacking in hitters' counts, hunting for certain pitches or certain locations to get that power to play. It's not going to take a lot for him to be a big league catcher with the defensive skills. Obviously, the ability to get on base through just walking, and the fact that there is power in there. So I'm pretty optimistic on him. I really like Diego Hernandez. He's a little more of the low probability, high ceiling guy. He's an outfielder who's a really good athlete. Plus run, can play center. There's some average power in there. It could end up developing into a little bit more. But he's like, you just tell him to go room with Alex Walt for a couple of months. I feel like we're putting a lot on Alex shoulders here, which is kind of unfortunate. But Hernandez needs the work on all the stuff. It's the ball strike recognition and the pitch recognition. And it's just generally having a better plan at the plate. This is the thing that they specialize in. Hernandez is the guy in the system of all the lower level prospects where I say, if you give him that, you do the Nick Prado, MJ Melendez at bat plan transplant, that guy goes from being in the teens in my list right now to top 5 in the system when we're talking about him as a guy who might make an all-star team someday, because he has the upside. And they don't have a lot of guys like that right now in the low minors coming from international free agency, where there's enough there right now that you can say, all right, it's not a small ask, but a real change in approach here takes this guy from low probability, high ceiling to, hey, this guy looks like he might be a star at some point in his career.
Keith, you're absolutely the best. I encourage everybody, the Athletic subscription. Keith alone is worth the price of that subscription. And integral part of every fantasy baseball preparation is Keith Law's prospect list. So, Keith, big fan. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you hopefully on down the road.
Thanks for having me. Go Eagles.
Had to get that in.
Well, it's a testament to how highly we think of him that we'll forgive him. That
yes, we'll forgive him about that.
So,
go ahead. What were we gonna say?
I was gonna say, I mean, there's so much to digest there.
Yeah.
I'm delighted that he chose two of my favorite guys in Carter Jensen and Diego Hernandez there as kind of likewise to watch. Him describing
Papa
him describing Carter Jensen as a glove first guy. And he said it with some shock in his voice, like that's not what he expected when Carter came out of the draft. That might be the single most positive thing I heard on this entire show, because I've in my mind I have this image of Carter Jensen on the bat first. If he can catch, he'll be great because he's such a good hitter, but I don't really think he can catch. I got to digest that one for a while, because Carter Jensen can catch defensively, and what I think of his bat, that's a guy we should be paying very close attention to this coming year. And
we joke around about him hating the organization, or he does not, but he's been a scout, a general manager, assistant general manager. I mean, his credentials, and as you mentioned, worked with you at Baseball Prospectus. He understands the analytics in addition to the mechanics of what's going on with pitching and swings and everything that goes into it. So he's just a wealth of knowledge to talk to. But we do know that he's not afraid to be critical when he's like, this isn't it. I think the best news for Royals fans is number 16 in the system. He likes the overall depth that's there. If JJ Picollo has added in people at all levels that can get more out of it, there's that was the most optimistic thing that I heard in that mix. I mean, it's great to hear about Gavin Cross and different guys, but the overall depth of the system, that to me is where if you're a Royals fan, you're like, okay, maybe it isn't a 5-year rebuild.
Yeah. No, like you said, he's always had this reputation, right, of hating organizations, because he doesn't blow smoke up your butt, right? I mean,
right.
That's what it is. He's not going to try and make you feel better if he legitimately doesn't believe in a guy. But what that means is his praise is I take more seriously than any other prospect guy out there. And there are a lot of other prospect mavens that I respect tremendously, but Keith has a reputation where, yes, maybe he's not always as positive, but if he says something positive about a player, you stand up and take notice. And like I said, I was legitimately surprised, maybe even shocked by where the Royals ranked on their organizational rankings. And the comments he's made about players that I've been on the fence about. Nick Lofton being a guy who I was pretty high on, but he got to AAA late in the year and really struggled to make contact, and I kind of cooled off on him a little bit. So hearing what Keith is saying, I'm back on the Nick Lofton, train. And, Carter Jensen, like we talked about, some of these other guys, MJ Melendez, the fact that he thinks MJ Melendez, the framing is, it's definitely a problem, but like the idea that the raw tools are still there for him to catch at the major league level. These are things I take seriously. The Royals have some decisions to make, but those are decisions based out of options, and those are options because they actually have talented players that they just need to figure out how to maximize their talents on a major league roster. So I'm feeling good in the sense that the raw tools are here for the Royals to be a competitive organization in the next year or two. They've got to do it. We know that there's many ways for that to fail, but at least they have the raw talent to make it possible.
Do you have a scariest thing? Because you're kind of in the neighborhood of my scariest thing that I heard from him. I'll let you have first crack at it.
The Asa Lacy is just like a complete mess. Scary. It's scary, but is it really anything we didn't already know? I guess that's at least the talent is there.
Yeah, I think to the degree he said like a rebuild. Right. Like Dayton made it seem like, well, maybe, we have to take away a pitch and then he's an ace reliever with his view. And he's, I know the Royals feel like the back injury was an issue and maybe that's how that connects and isn't as bad as we think, is because his delivery was all jacked up because he's trying to pitch while he's hurt and they calm him down.
Well, that's
healthy, but yeah, that's scary.
I said this during the season, but one of the biggest, one of the decisions the Royals made in this past season that just made me, rip out any hair that I would have if I had any hair to rip out was the decision to send him back to Double-A, Asa Lacy, after a rehab stint in which he walked over a batter an inning in rookie ball. It was the level of denial that Asa Lacy is not just rehabbing. Asa Lacy is broken. He couldn't throw strikes in rookie ball, and the Royals like, we'll send him to Double-A. What on earth, were they think was going to happen at that Double-A level? I think of note that was, I think, still when Dayton Moore was in charge of the organization, and I am hopeful. Like, if you tell me if the Royals announce that Asa Lacy is staying in extended spring training, he doesn't break camp with a minor league team this coming year, I will be completely on board with that, because that's at least an acknowledgement that he does need a rebuild, that this is not something you can just kind of ignore, slap a Band-Aid on and go out there and get him, boys. No, he has a delivery that fundamentally doesn't work right now. And I'm really hoping that one of the differences between Dayton Moore and J.J. Piccolo is just an acknowledgement that you can't just, as you put it, love up these players. You can't just fix a guy by showing confidence in him, that you actually have to pinpoint the problem, address it, and fix it. And then maybe you'll have something.
And not to pick at a scab you and I have had discussions over many times, but the one thing that was concerning to me was, and it's not what Keith said, it's what they're doing. And that's, he said, get MJ Melendez behind the plate and let him catch. And, I'll go back to the part we talked about, hopefully they're going to be better pitch framers back there. We've talked about robot umps. That seems to be coming, and maybe that's going to change everything. But, the idea that I think they're still planning on a lot of left field for MJ Melendez. And I don't know how you get better catching if you're playing left field. And I think just, that to me, to hear him say, listen, he's athletic, he can really throw. Like, I don't think this would be going, if Keith Law were the general manager of the Royals, he would not be playing left field. He would probably, and with all the young catching coming, maybe that's scary too, to have to say goodbye to Salvador Perez and watch.
Well, I was going to say, if Keith Law was in general running the Royals, I think he would trade Salvador Perez.
Yes.
And I think that, we sort of briefly touched on it last week. I kind of broached the subject, but I really feel like if the Royals are committed to winning and not just being a wonderful place to work, but actually committed to building a winning organization and going to the playoffs, there is no greater sign that they could send out right now than to trade Salvador Perez. And as a fan, emotionally, it would hurt for a little while, but as an analyst, I would be thrilled, because it means the Royals understand the best interests of this organization or they've got to open up the catcher position to find out if Imogen Melendez can catch. Because if he can catch, he can be an incredibly valuable player. And the fallback plan, like he said, is the Royals have a lot of catching depth in this farm system. Carter Jensen in a couple of years might be that guy, but Luca Tresh is almost ready now to at least be he's better than a backup, maybe a second division starter, but like you could do a lot worse a year from now than have Luca Tresh as your starting catcher. And having Tresh and Melendez sharing that job back there, you can get some value there. You open up an outfield spot because the Royals have some outfielders they want to look at that probably can be better defenders than Melendez. You get Salvador Perez, maybe you get at least part of his salary off your payroll. Maybe you pick up half of it, and that actually allows you to bring in a top 100 prospect or something close to it as well. So it's a hard emotional decision, but analytically, it's an easy call to me.
Rany, we're depending upon when people consume this podcast, we're just over a week away as we sit here, 8 days away from pitchers and catchers reporting. So depending upon when you're catching us, we may be under a week away. We got one more podcast to do on the day of. We'll do that on the day that pitchers and catchers report. And then we're talking about spring training baseball, and the season is right around the corner. It's amazing how fast this off season has gone. For sure. We want to thank Keith Law. Always great insight. And I mean it. Read his books. His books are great, especially if you're just kind of getting into baseball. He really unlocks a lot of the analytics part of things. He's great on that front, but also his prospect and his writing about what's going on in the minor leagues is second to none. It's at The Athletic, and he's worth the price of admission just for his writing, especially if you're a baseball fan. So, for the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, my name is Soren Petro. I want to thank you for joining us here on Kauffman Corner. Again, I want to thank our fine sponsor, Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the entire KC area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete is Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Any parking lot problem you got, they'll make it disappear. They've been doing it since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project, a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Make sure you tell them you heard about them here on the Kauffman Corner. Next week, we talk about it on the day of pitchers and catchers reporting. We'll do it again. The Kauffman Corner Podcast coming up next week. For Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro saying